what's up everybody? This is Brian and I want to welcome you back to Saving Data in iOS video tutorial series. In this video tutorial, I'm going to be covering the NSFileManager. This is the class that you use, not surprisingly, to manage your files with. This class is actually rather extensive, so this video tutorial is only going to be focusing on some of the more common operations. Working with the NSFileManager is really easy. The first thing you need to do is get an instance of the FileManager, and you can do this using a singleton method. You can do NSFileManager default manager, and that will give you an instance, or if you want to alloc and init, you can do that as well. The NSFileManager provides a high-level API with working with the file system, and this API is really easy to use. It gives you the ability to create directories, rename directories, move directory. You can move files, delete files, change permissions, and so forth. So you have all that power of working with the file system in a really easy to use API. Now, the thing to keep in mind is the NSFileManager is thread safe, but there's a little caveat to that. If you are getting an instance of it through a singleton method and you pass a delegate to it, that delegate will be called on any additional threads that you're using the NSFileManager with the singleton method. If you want to get a fresh copy without a delegate, you would just use an alloc and init instead. One of the first things you may want to do when working with a FileManager is getting a path. Now, you've already been getting paths through using the NSSearch paths for directories and domains. Well, the NSFileManager has a similar method. It's called it's directory for URL, and it works almost the exact same way. First, you're going to pass in the directory you're looking for. So if you're looking for your library directory, you're going to put NS library directory. The next argument is asking you for your domain mask, and it's the same. You're going to put in NS user domain mask. And the next argument is an interesting argument. It's called appropriate for URL, and I'll get into that in just a moment. The next argument is called should create. So if the path that you're looking for doesn't exist and you put yes, it's going to create it for you. So it's a nice little convenience method. And the final argument, of course, is an error object. So you're going to pass in the address of an error object, and if this method returns nil, then you can query that error object to see exactly what has gone wrong, and you can respond to it. Also, if you're not interested in any error checking, you can just pass in nil as well. So getting back to appropriate for URL, this is used for a very specific use case. So say you're working on you have a word processor app, the user's typing in information, they're typing in a text, and you want to save it every so often. Well, what you'll want to do is save to a sort of temporary directory and keep these autosaves for. And this is what appropriate for URL will do for you. First, you have to declare that you're looking for the directory that you want to get the path for. It has to be an NS item replacement directory. So you're going to put that as the first argument. Then in appropriate for URL, you're going to put a URL that you want associated with it. So say I want this associated with my documents directory. I'm going to put my documents path in that appropriate for URL. Now when you run this method, the FileManager will create this directory for you, and it will send you back this URL, which you can now be saving data to. Now, in the documentation, this is considered a temp directory, but keep in mind that iOS will not delete this for you. So it's on you to actually delete this directory yourself when you're done with it. One thing you may notice is the NSFileManager returns URLs. It doesn't return strings. And this is just because Apple works more efficiently. It prefers to work with URLs. It can store the paths more efficiently than working with an NS string and doing all conversions. So whenever working with the FileManager, try to use the NS URLs whenever you can. And again, when working with any sort of temp directories, whenever you're creating temporary directories, it's on you to delete them, even though they may be labeled temp. So just keep that in mind. So as you can see, working with the NSFileManager is relatively simple. If you need to get an NS URL for a certain directory, you would just use the method URL for directory, and you'd pass in the directory you need. So if you need the document directory, you do NS document directory, and so on. Well, this all breaks down if you need to gain access to your temporary directory. There's just no way to do this from your FileManager. Well, there is a function that can do this, and it's called NS temporary directory. And this is going to return an NS string, and this is a path to your actual temporary directory. From there, you're going to want to convert it to an NS URL, and there's a class method to do that. You're going to call file URL with path, you're going to pass in that NS string, and then you get a complete NS URL for your temporary directory. I'm not too sure why Apple has set it up this way, but it's just something to keep in mind when working with the file manager in your projects. One of the more useful methods in NSFileManager is actually printing out the list of a directory. So if you're looking for a file, if you're looking for groups of files, you can use the method contents for directory at URL. And what this does is it's going to return an NS array of NS URLs that you can go through. The very first argument you're going to pass in is the an NS URL of what you want to list out. And the next argument is including properties for keys. And this takes an array of keys of certain properties you want to be cached and associated with those NS URLs. There are a ton of keys, so check out the documentation to see exactly what is available to you. The next argument is options, and this takes an NS directory enumerating option, and there's three options, but only one of them that's really applicable to this, and that's NS directory enumerating skip hidden files. So if you're not interested in hidden files, you can pass that in. Otherwise, this method will return hidden files. And finally, you'll pass in the address for an error object. And again, if you're not interested in the error object, you can pass in nil. So there are just a few things to keep in note about this method. It's going to return just the files for the current directory. So if there are any subdirectories in this directory, it won't return the files within those. There's actually another method that will do that if you're interested in doing that. It's, I believe, enumerator at URL, and that will go through the entire tree of directories. This also won't follow symbolic links as well. So just keep that in mind when working with that. This will also won't return references to the current directory or the parent directory, which would be a period or period, or it won't show anything references to resource forks, period, so that would be a period underscore. So if you're used to working with directories and filtering those results out from it, you don't have to worry about that in this case. And finally, this will show hidden files, so that's another thing to keep in mind. Now, if you're looking for a specific type of file or a specific NS URL resource, you can actually take that returned array and throw that into an NS predicate. And the NS predicate, based on your criteria, will call out all the things you aren't interested in so that you'll get all the resources you are interested in. So definitely check out NS predicates for you to save time when working with directories. The NSFileManager also gives you the ability to determine whether a file or directory exists at a certain path, and it's called file exists at path. And you're going to pass in the path, and the path is of type NSString, so it's not an NS URL. So you're going to pass in a string with the absolute path there, and then you're going to pass in a variable, a Boolean variable, and it's going to be the address of the Boolean. And the way this works is that once you call this method, and it determines the path exists, or it's going to see if the path is actually a directory or a symbolic link. And if that's the case, that Boolean value is going to be yes, otherwise it's going to be no. So you can use that to make any logic decisions if necessary. Now, the thing to keep in mind when working with this method is that Apple actually prefers you not to. So if you actually go in and check to see if a resource exists, and then you would probably just go in and then start accessing that resource, you might create a bad user experience. For instance, in this example, this function may return yes, this path exists, this resource exists, and then what will happen is, say, another thread will delete that resource, and then your current thread will start up and then go in and try to access it and ignore any error messages that will result from it. And this could create a crash or just a really bad user experience. So what Apple suggests you do is just go into it and start accessing this resource right away. And then if there is a problem, you can respond to the error message and then take appropriate steps from there. So just keep that in mind when working with this method. The NSFileManager also gives you the ability to create directories. And you're just going to call the method create directory at URL, and you're going to pass in an NS URL. Now, the next argument is called with intermediate directories. So say, for instance, you want to create a series of subdirectories in your user's documents folder. So if you wanted to organize it by date, you would just say like documents/2014/05/ and then you do by the day and so forth. If you put yes to that intermediate directories and those directories didn't exist, this create directories would create them for you. Now, if you still designated that all those directories to have all those directories and you put no for intermediate directories, then this method's going to fail with an error. So just keep that in mind when working with it. The next argument is our options, and you're going to pass in an NS dictionary of any options you want to customize or the properties of a directory. So if you need to modify the permissions or so forth, or the group or the owner of a directory, you would do that in this argument. And finally, the last argument is an error object. You would pass in the address of an error object, and of course, if you didn't want to respond to it, you could pass in a nil as well. There's going to be times when you're going to want to delete items as well, and the NSFileManager actually has a method that you can use, and this is remove item at URL. You're going to pass in an NS URL of the item. It can be either a file or a directory, and then you're going to pass in an error object. This method is going to return either a yes or a no, and if it returns a no, then you can actually query the error object to see exactly what happens. Now, if you're deleting a directory, this method will delete everything contained within that directory. So if you have a bunch of subdirectories, it's going to delete those as well. And the other thing to note is that there is an actual delegate method called should_remove_item@path. And this will run every time this delete call is run. So in a way, you can actually use the delegate method as a safeguard, which will actually override this method to prevent it from deleting files. So just keep that in mind when working with this in the future. NSFileManager also gives you the ability to move items, and by items I mean files and directories. To move items, you're going to call moveItem@URL, and you're going to provide an NS URL for the source, and then you're going to provide an NS URL for the destination. This method, of course, always takes the address of an error object, so if you want to check to see if there are any errors, you can do that, or you can provide a nil as well. And this works almost the same way as the delete method. When you move a folder, all the containing items will be moved as well. This also responds to a delegate will respond to a certain method, so that when you move it, a delegate of the NSFileManager will be notified, and you can prevent the move from happening.
Okay, in this demo, I'm going to be covering the NSFileManager. I'm going to be showing you how you can work with it, how you can create directories, move directories, delete items, and so forth. So let's just dive right in. I'm just going to start a new Xcode project. And it's just going to be a simple single view application. And for the name, I'm just going to call it FileManager Demo. I'm just going to save this on my desktop. Since we're working entirely in code, I'm just going to do everything in AppDelegate. And I'm just going to close these here, give us some room. So the very first thing you're going to want to do when working with the FileManager is to actually get a reference to the FileManager. And you can just simply type NSFileManager. We'll just call this FileManager. And we'll use the singleton method, default manager. Now, what I'm going to do in this demo is create a few strings, and I'm going to save them, first of all, in our temporary directory. So I have to get a reference to our temporary directory. And I'm going to be using NS URLs, but as we know, getting an NS URL for the temporary directory from the file manager is problematic. So I have to use another function called NS temporary directory. So here's how we do this. I'm going to create a string to hold the path. And now I'm going to call this function NS temporary directory. And that returns a string path for my temporary directory. Now I'm just going to get a URL and convert this into an actual NS URL. And now I have an NS URL to my temporary directory. Okay, so the first thing, now that I have these set up, next thing I'm going to want to do is create some strings. And I'm just going to do this in a regular for loop. And now I'm going to create a new string. And this is just going to print out I am string number 0, I am string number 1, I am string number 2, and so forth. And that's the content of the string. Now I'm going to create a path for the string this is the location where I will be saving the string to. I'm going to do this by getting temp directory URL by appending path component. And now I'm going to pass in another string. So now each string is going to be named string 0, string 1.txt, string 2.txt, and so forth. So now it's time to save it. And I'm just going to save each string using its own method, write URL, and I'm just going to pass in the save URL. I'm going to say it's atomic. NSUTF-8 string encoding, and I'm just not going to pass an error object. And now when I save it and I run, I will get 6 strings. So how do we see these strings? Well, let's actually print out the contents of the temporary directory to our console, just so that we can see the strings. I can do NSArray, and I'm going to call this directory listing, and I'm going to call FileManager contents URL. So this is going to return an NSArray of NSURL objects. So first I'm going to provide the actual directory. So this is going to be the temp directory. I'm not going to include any properties for keys. Options, I'm going to NS directory enumeration skip hidden files. And I'm just not going to pass in an error as well. So now that I have a listing of arrays, let's just iterate through them and see exactly what they are. And let's build and run. And I'll close this here. And you can see all my files here. I have string0.txt, string1.txt, and so forth. Now that's pretty helpful, but oftentimes when you save a file, you're going to want to see if it's there in the quickest way possible. And if you're just wanting to test if it's there in terms of testing, you don't want to actually write additional code to see what's actually in that directory. There's actually a better way to do that, and that's actually using your Finder. So as you know, I'm working in the simulator, and it's saving everything to my hard drive, so I can look inside my application bundle to see exactly what's going on. And I can see all the directories and so forth. And the way I'm going to do that is just I'm going to get a Finder window, and I'm going to go into my home directory. And there's a folder called library, and this is hidden by default. So if you're not seeing this, you need to type in some additional commands into your terminal to make this visible. And I'm going to post those commands in this actual video tutorial. So I'm going to look in library, and there's a folder called application support. So you're going to look into that. And inside, you're going to look for the folder called iPhone Simulator. Now in iPhone Simulator here, you'll see that there's a whole bunch of directories, and this corresponds to each simulator, 6.1.7, 7.70, 64, and that's for 64-bit architecture, and 7.1, 7.164. So I'm going to look in 7.1 because that's the one I've been using. And you can see I have some more folders to go into, and I'm most interested in applications. So I'm just going to go into here, and you can see I have a whole bunch of folders. So I'll go through each of these. You can see we have web contents. These are all the different applications I've installed, and this is the one I'm interested right here, FileManager demo. So this is where I will be saving stuff. So this is my bundle here. This is my library folder. This is my documents folder, and you can see here is my temporary folder. So I can click in here, and you can see I have all my strings, string 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And if I click here and preview it, you'll see that I'm string number 0. So whenever you're working and saving to the file system, oftentimes it's much easier to check the Finder than writing additional Objective-C code to see that. So that's just good to know. Okay, let me stop this and continue on. So the next thing I'm going to want to do is actually move these files out of my temporary directory and move them into my documents directory. And I'm going to create 2 directories for that. I'm going to create a big ender directory and a little ender directory. So the very first thing I'm going to want to do is create a document. I want to get an NSURL to my document directory. So now I have my document directory. Now I want to create a big ender directory and a little ender directory. And these are just, what I'm doing is going to randomly put one string in the big ender and put another string in the little ender. Big ender and little ender is a reference to Gulliver's Travels. And in Gulliver's Travels, Gulliver is actually captured by the Lilliputians, and he ultimately integrates into their society and learns that they are at war with each other, where the big enders break their eggs on the big side and the little enders break their eggs on the little side. And believe it or not, this actually does have significance in computer science, because these big enders and little enders were also known as big endians and little endians. And a big endian and a little endian are references to ways how computer memory stores and works on a byte level. So just a little bit of random trivia for you. So I'm going to do URL by appending path component. And this is going to be big ender is directory yes. And we're going to do little ender. I'm just going to copy paste this. Is directory yes. So now that I have references to both these, I'm now going to use the FileManager to create these directories. And it's very simple to do. You just do create directory at URL. I'm going to create the big ender directory. And we're going to create the little ender directory. And if I build and run, you can see we still get our log files. But if we go to our Finder, we'll go out of here and we'll go into our documents folder, and you'll see now we have big ender and we have little ender. Okay, so now let's separate the files. And what I want to do is actually move them from the temporary directory into either a big ender directory or a little ender directory. And I'm just going to do this by a simple modulus. If an item is even, it goes into one directory. If an item is odd, it goes into another directory based on an integer in a for loop. So I'm sure many of you have done this before. So I'm just going to do for int I equals 0, I less than 6, I plus plus. And now I'm going to get my destination URL. When moving a file, you want to provide a complete source URL of the file that's being moved, and then you want to provide another URL with the destination. So the destination file has to include the file name itself. So if you just put the directory that you're moving it to, it's going to assume that you're renaming it to that directory. So first I'm going to get my destination URL. And I'm going to create a file name. So this is very similar to what I've done previously. I'm just going to get the file name. And now I'm going to get the target item. And this is the item I'm going to want to move. So I'm just going to get in my temp directory, and I'm going to do URL by appending path component. And I'm going to pass in a file name. Is directory no. Now, let's find out which files to actually move. And this is the big ender directory. If modulus 2 equals 0, we'll put them in the big ender directory. Otherwise, we'll put them in the little ender directory. And these two variables are referring to these URLs we've created up here. So now that we have our target item and we have where they're going to go, we first have to create the full complete destination path by adding the file name. And now we have everything set up. It's time to actually move the item. So we're going to do FileManager, and we're going to use the command move item at URL. And I'm going to pass in the target item. Then I'm going to put the destination URL, and I'll put a nil result there. And now that should move the item. So if I build and run, you can see we get our text here, and we go back to our Finder. You can see now in little ender we have strings 1, 3, 5, and in big ender we have strings 0, 2, 4. So that's pretty useful. Now, ultimately, you're going to reach a point where you're going to want to delete a file. And deleting a file or directory is the same process as moving a directory. Say if we wanted to delete all the little enders, we could easily just call a command like such. It's called remove item at remove item at URL. And let's just wipe out all our little enders. And we'll build and run. And then we come back here and you see our little ender directory is gone. So what if we want to actually prevent a removal happening or a moving action from happening? Well, in this case, you'd create a delegate to do this. And in this example, I'm going to try to delete the big enders, but the big enders actually have a shield. So let's create the shield to prevent the big enders from being deleted. So let's come up in our FileManager demo, and we're going to create a new file. And this is going to be an Objective-C class, and I'm just going to call it big ender shield. And we're going to create here. In the big under shield, I'm going to go to the header, and this is going to be a NSFileManager delegate. I'm going to save that, and now I'm going to move to the implementation file. And the one I'm interested in is actually FileManager, and it's all the way, you can see all these different delegate methods available to you. Should link item, should move item, and we'll just go all the way to the bottom, and you can see should remove item at URL, and that's the one we're interested in. So I'm going to pass in a bool, should remove, and this is the default value. And yes, you should remove. Now let's do our logic test to see if this is actually a big ender path. So the way I'm going to determine if this is a big ender or not, I'm going to get a string, and this is going to be the path of the URL. And I can do this by doing URL absolute string. And this is the URL that was passed into this delegate method. Now I'm just going to do a simple search on this URL string. And if it finds big ender within this actual string, then we shouldn't delete it. And with that logic in place, we're going to say should remove equals no. And now we're going to return should remove. So now we're going to go back to our app delegate. And first thing I might want to do is now create a instance of my big ender shield. So I'm going to come up to the top here and import it. Big ender shield. I'm going to go to the bottom of my file, where I was last working, and now I'm going to create an instance of it. Big ender shield. And now I'm going to set this big ender shield as a delegate of my FileManager. And then finally, I'm going to remove item at index, remove item at URL, excuse me, and then I'm going to pass in big ender directory. We'll just fix that error. And now we're going to build and run. Okay, let's see if it worked. You can see we still have our big ender directory, and the delegate prevented the deletion.
Well, that's it for this video tutorial, but as always, we like to end off with a challenge. In your challenge, I've created a very simple app that has a zip file. Your job is to unzip this file using a library that I've included and dump all of the contents of this zip file into the temp directory. Then I want you to copy all those files into the user's documents directory. Now, if you want to move into the Uber hacker level, that next I would like you to do is to sort these files. Basically, I want you to unzip them into the temp directory again, but this time I want you to create a ping directory and a JPEG directory in the user's documents directories. Then I want you to copy all the pings into the ping folder and all the JPEGs in the JPEG folder. Then I want you to take the text files and also move them into the library folders as well. I hope you've enjoyed this video tutorial. Thanks for watching. See you next time.